Hello students, today we will learn about the importance of editing and revising. Now have a look at my screen. It is module number 1, why editing and revising are necessary. Here is the overview of the whole lesson. Firstly, we have to learn about the reasons why writing is difficult. Then we are going to talk about the enforcing rules that can be applied to revising and editing. Next, we'll learn about the quality concept in translation. Quality is a very general term and it can be different from person to person. In the next two sessions, we learn about the limit to editing and revision as well as the proper role of revision. Um, so before we start, we should bear in mind some of the background knowledge like this. Um, it is very easy to write sentences that are structured in such a way that the readers will misunderstand them or have difficulty understanding them. It can be the case when we have an ambiguous sentence and that sentence can be understood in two different paraphrases. For example, visiting a relative, visiting relatives is very boring. So it can be something like it is boring to visit a relative, or the relative who visits us is very boring and we don't want to welcome and receive them, right? Secondly, it is quite easy when we are writing to forget about the future readers and write something which is not suitable for them or to the use that will make of the text. Because when we write, we often focus our minds on the writing. We couldn't and cannot and shall not care about who will be the reader or the future reader of our text. Third, a text may fail to conform to linguistic norms or to the reigning ideas about the proper way to translate or to write in a particular genre. For example, we are the English language learners, and sometimes there can be a case when the student cannot adhere to the new structure, the new collocation. So in this case, mistake is unavoidable. And finally, what the author or translator has written may be against, may conflict with the publisher goals. It depends on the case. However, sometimes, normally, our view will be quite similar to the publisher's goals. So, what are the revisers and editors' job? They are often considered as gatekeepers. They want to make sure that the text shall conform to society's linguistic and textual norms and can achieve the publisher's goals as well. In the other case, revisers and editors are named language therapists because they have to track and to treat and to cure problems in a text. Okay, so there are many ways in which a text might be defective or we can see errors in a text. For example, typing errors. Sometimes the numbered headings are not suitable. Sometimes we can see the author using a word combination that is idiomatically wrong. Or sometimes you have to read a sentence twice to get to the point or to understand it. And another way where the text might be defective is the use of the reference pronoun like it or they, and we cannot see and tell who or what these words refer to. Okay, The text sometimes contains a great many words which the reader do not understand at all because they are not the experts. They are not very highly educated, or they are just the layman. They are the outsider to the job. Okay, and the text is not written in a way that is appropriate to the genre. For example, it is a recipe. However, it doesn't begin with a list of ingredients. Instead, it is rather vague about how to make the dish, and it has a lot of commentaries on the history of the dish and the chefs who are famous for making this kind of dish. It's not very suitable for a recipe, right? And if the text is a narrative, it is hard to follow the sequences of events. And if it is an argument, it is hard to follow the steps. And if you find a text that shares the features of this, then that text is a kind of defective because it has not a very good flow. And at the other time, one sentence is very contradictory, or there are passages in the same essays which contradict each other. For example, my aunt is the only child of my grandparents. It is contradictory, right? Because if you have one aunt, then you have your father as well. So your grandparents had two children. Your aunt can't be the only child of your grandparents. So, for other information related to the conflict demands faced by the editors and revisers, we can skip it because we will have further explanation in chapter number 10. Now, let's move to the focus of the lesson. Firstly, why writing is difficult. Unlike speaking, where you have someone to listen to you and correct you if any, for writing you have no immediate feedback from the readers. So we shall treat good writing as a way of communication, and you have to be aware of what the future readers want to know and do not know about what you're writing. The second reason writings are difficult because written documents is normally quite lengthy, quite wordy and lengthy. So we can see some kind of risk emerge. It is a risk of inconsistencies in content, in writing, in word choice, in jargon, in register. The third reason is a lack of intonation and gestures. By intonation, I mean we can have something up and down in a speech, like this. I don't like this, and I don't like this. It is kind of intonation. However, for writing, what we have is the side of the words only. So, the reader of the writing may not get the true meaning. Okay, for example, if someone is late to the class and the teacher may say, Lan, you have such a good habit, then we know that thanks to his intonation we can know that the teacher is complaining about the late coming by Lan. However, for the writing we can't know that, right? So there is risk of ambiguity and unclear connection between passages that stands one by one. Now we have an example. This example is about problematic writing. Try to figure out which type of error you can see in this example. Now let's read. As the studies tend to show, the form translation has taken in Canada, both on an institutional level and on the level of the actual practice of translation, is specific to our particular national context. So, by dint of our syntactic knowledge, we know that this one is the main verb, this one is the predicative, Then someone preceding these words shall be the subject. But we can't tell for sure because this one is the adverbial, right? Both on and on. So, as this study tends to show, the form translation has taken in Canada, there shall be some kind of missing comma in these clause so that the adjunct can be distinguished from the subject. Now, look at the correct reading. As this study tends to show, comma, the form translation has taken in Canada is specific to our particular national context. There is another reason for the difficulty of writing. It is in the case of writing a translation, it is very hard to convey the author's message or meaning. So, conveying others' meaning, especially to avoid undesirable linguistic influences, can seep from the source language. So you can see that there shall be a combination of planning and self-editing by good writers and translators. We will use the image from the job or the profession to illustrate types of writing by different people. There are four categories. Someone can be an architect. For an architect, they will plan a lot before they write. So a lot of planning, and for the self-editing, it is quite little. They do not self-edit too much during their drafting, normally after the drafting. However, for an oil painter, they have a very free style, so very little planning before drafting. However, while they are drafting or even after their drafting, they can self-edit a lot. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about the enforcing rules that can be applied to editors and revisers. These rules are called the external regulation on writing or translation, and there are two subtypes. Firstly, the translations workers or editors and translators have to suffer from and adhere to standards in language. We say linguistic standards. For example, they have to follow the rules from the dictionary, the grammar, the authorities. What kind of English to use, BE or AE, okay? And then sometimes they have to follow the rhetorical habits and young traditions. For example, you cannot use a format to write a letter, to write a report or an essay. Different kinds of journals have different kinds of formats, and you have to follow the correct type, the correct format. And by linguistic standards, there are also rules from the publishers. For example, whether or not to write the 8 number like 8 a number or spelling 8, okay? Or when you mean someone else, should you use he or she, he/she, or they? Another regulation is kind of commissioned writing. It is when you write for somebody and you are commissioned, then you have to satisfy a certain client. Now I'm going to talk about quality in translation. Firstly, there are two types of needs that we need to distinguish. According to the ISO 90,000, the degree to which the inherent characteristic of an object fulfill a set of stated or implied requirements, with requirements defined to include needs, expectations, and obligations. Implied requirements are those which are common practice or customary. So, quality is always relative to needs, and there are several degrees of quality. It can be information quality and publication quality, and the needs can be either stated or implied. For example, accuracy, successful communication of text message to the readers are, the implied needs. Now, we have three concepts of quality. Um, it is just like when we want to give definition to an event. Different people who touch different places in that event can give definitions that are totally different from one another's, right? So by quality, we have the same case, differing philosophies of revision. Then we have firstly client satisfaction concept of quality. For example, if you have a writing and you think that, well, this kind of text is not very quality, is not of high quality. However, from the point of view by your clients, he or she claim that it is quality enough, then that text is quality. Secondly, quality can mean you do what is necessary to protect and promote the target language. For example, you are translating something from English to Vietnamese. In this case, the target language is Vietnamese, right? And you see that if you retain the form, the semicolons, all the punctuations in the English text, then you have a Vietnamese text that sounds unnatural, and Vietnamese reader may give you some kind of complaints, criticize. Okay, then you should do something to protect and promote the Vietnamese language. And the last type is quality is a kind of fit for purpose. Fit for purpose. So then, it shall be perceived and as quality from the viewpoint of purpose. For example, this kind of writing sounds not very natural. However, it is suitable just to understand primarily the text given to get some general ideas. It cannot be harder for you to translate, then it is a good translation. So a focus for revisers' work is, will it be on the specifications for the job, on language protections, or on the appropriateness for users and use. This one is a case of English to French translation. The concept of quality under which reviser work may vary from country to country or from language pair to language pair. It may even vary by direction. For example, in Canada, English to French revisers tend to be quite concerned with the language protection aspect of revision, whereas that is not true anymore for French to English revisers, except perhaps for those who work in Quebec, where English is a minority language influenced by French. Revisers and editors who work in the countries where the language of work is not the local language may also be more concerned with the protection aspect of translation and those who work in majority English-speaking countries. So now you can come to some of the conclusion that editing and revision is very important. to have a very perfect possible, right? A perfect text possible. However, editors and revisers are not written to know all. There are still some limits, some restrictions to editing and revision. We have some scenarios. Number one, shall we edit and or revise any text until it fits a given quality idea? The answer is a big no, because it depends, right? It is hard to write, but speaking is very easy, even though it is complicated. We all learn to speak as children without any instructions, but it takes a very long time to learn to write, and people's writing is still awful. Um, it depends on different factors. For example, if you are given 50,000 VND, then how you shall edit and revise can be very different if you are given a pay of 500,000. You should think of whether it is economical or costly to revise. Sometimes, if you see that the errors are too much, so many mechanical errors, you should reject, and ask the writer to write again before you edit. Scenario number two, if you are given with some political or economical concern, some clients may ask you to proceed with the editing of bad writing despite economic consideration. Is it true or false? Yeah, it is true. It is true. Another scenario is editing is not rewriting and revising is not retranslating. So in the case of badly translated text, you shouldn't edit or revise. You should ask the text to be retranslated or rewritten before you have it revised and edited. And this one is quite similar to what we have discussed in section 1.4. That is the proper role of revision. It is very necessary, but it is important not to place too great a burden on revising. And remember, revising shall not be the main way to ensure quality. Quality can be ensured by preventive actions. That is to hire translators with training, with qualification and talent, with the skills required for a given workplace. So you should use the right translator. Okay. Sometimes you should have them have a translator so that they can have a good access to the tools, the documents, the term banks, or other previous translation, and subject matter experts as well. And revision should be seen as a final resort to clean up the inevitable errors. The main burden should fall on the translators, not the revisers.